Hello, Romantics. I'm Sarah Gomez, author, romance lover, and host. You're listening to Romancing the Story, a podcast centered around writing, reading, and story structure, all with a twist of romance. It's a very spooktacular Halloween special. And today, we focus on what else? The paranormal. We're at episode 39, and on today's episode, I speak with author, book editor, and literary agent Patrice Caldwell. She discussed the process of wrangling 15 of today's best-selling YA authors to curate and edit a paranormal romance anthology to die for. The swoony anthology, titled Eternally Yours, is currently available and includes thrilling stories from writers like Casey McQuiston, Julian Winters, Kat Cho, Melissa de la Cruz, and Chloe Gong. Patrice walked me through the initial inspiration behind an anthology as diverse as the authors, and her passion for highlighting those voices. She also went into great detail about what her editing process looked like to finalize a sexy, irresistible anthology that's cohesive. If you're interested in the Eternally Yours anthology or following Patrice, I left links and information in the episode description. I also put links to some of the other books from contributors in the anthology, a TED Talk video that's referenced, and credit to the new spine-chilling music. Just a quick reminder, don't forget to check back during NaNoWriMo. I'll be uploading lots of fantastic episodes focused on writing a novel in a month, and I'll be packing it full of tips, tricks, and encouragement for writers. Hope everyone is ready. With that said, let's jump right in. Welcome, literary agent, YA author, and founder of People of Color in Publishing, Patrice Caldwell. Yay!
Hi! So great to be here.
I'm so glad that you were able to join the podcast. So in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your experience in publishing?
Most recently, I'm the editor of Eternally Yours, which is my YA paranormal romance anthology. It's featuring 15 stories of paranormal love. And, like you mentioned, I'm also a literary agent. I'm working on my first novel that it's actually due in like 4 days, to this Friday, to my editor when we're in the middle of revising. and yeah, I feel like it's pretty much just, I work in book publishing and I'm also a writer. So yeah.
So you have like the full gamut experience really of publishing, right? A little bit of everything.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of nice, I feel like I get to see both sides of everything, I like that. I feel like, I think people often ask me like, oh, like, do you feel like there's no secrets? And like, is it like, bad in that way? And I'm like, I actually think that's what makes it kind of fun. First of all, there are always, secrets. I feel like no day is the same, but also I love that I used to have my hands in everything, so it makes it fun.
So you're the founder of People of Color in Publishing, an organization dedicated to supporting, empowering, and uplifting racially and ethnically marginalized members of the book publishing industry. So how did that come about?
I probably started the org it was probably when I was an editorial assistant. It was when I was an editorial assistant. It was at this point, it was years ago, back before, I would say that people say the before times, there used to be a lot of different types of organizations that I think do still exist, but it's not quite the same, or a lot of in-person networking, a lot of, like early to career, young to publishing kind of organizations. And, being one of the few people of color in like my space, and like, I was always going out and trying to meet other people of color. And so basically a friend of mine, Lisa Corey, had reached out, and she was just like, how do you always know all these people of color? And, I kind of started thinking about it, like, how do I, like, I don't know, just like trying to think of it in a way of like, and I think the great thing about starting my career at Scholastic is that Scholastic has like a huge like editorial assistant cohort, or just I guess in general, like they have a lot of like, entry level people who start at the same time as me. So there was like Wesley Turner and Kate Feldman. There were two other editorial assistants I was close with who also are women of color. And so I kind of like went to them and was just kind of like, hey, and just started talking to them more about like her question. And then we went to Andrea Davis Pickney, who's like a longtime mentor of mine who, I owe so much of like where I am in this industry due to her mentorship, just being there and being supportive. And she was kind of like around the corner from me. She was just a Black woman. She is a Black woman which is in a very high up position, at Scholastic. And that meant a lot just to like, have her presence there, even though we were in different groups. And so I went to her and I kind of was like, hey, like, is there an org like this? Should something be started? She gave me a rundown of history of like, well, here's what, has been here at this time. And here's what's been there at this time. But she ultimately is just like, Patrice, like, you should do it. Cause she kind of said like, she wasn't saying like, I don't know, people my age don't need, like people at my level don't need this at all. But she was just saying like, it seems like where the most need is like right where you're at. And she was like, you should do the thing. So at first we kind of conceived of it as a younger, like something just like for like people in like the first 5 years in the industry. But what happened when we had our first meeting was that so many people showed up and then it was just kind of the thing, we're like, how could we, So it focused definitely a lot more on recruitment and retention in those earlier years, because that's where a lot of us were when we started the organization. But no, that's kind of it. It kind of expanded. And I actually, so I'm still the founder, I'm still advising, but I actually stepped down from the org a couple years ago, honestly, because I think not because of any kind of like, I love everything that org does, but you realize at a certain point, I'm not entry level. And it was really important for me to be able to make space for other people. So someone else to step into those shoes, someone who's like really on the pulse to like step in and be like, okay, I'm going to be like running this organization, and being involved with it. And it just felt like the right time. I had run it for a few years and like, it was able to stand on its own. And I mean, that's a beautiful thing, it was like really bittersweet, but like, it was also really wonderful because I was like, wow, I created this thing that can like live beyond me. Right. Which I think, at least for me, that's all I feel like that always is the goal. Something that like, I mean, that's how I feel about, making like, books and stuff like that. Is like, I'm a firm believer in like, once you create something, it's kind of like you release it into the world, and I like the idea of things that can like kind of live beyond you.
Yeah. And that's a wonderful legacy. Bring that up and then have it kind of go off to someone else, be able to like mentor someone to where that they can take it and run with it.
It's so amazing. And, the cool thing is like, people still reach out to me and like, I do a lot. I always tell my assistant, as like a literary agent, I'm always telling her like, please, if people reach out for information or interview, I want to make the time. Now, of course, it doesn't mean I can do it today or even this week, but I feel like people make the time for me to be able to do that stuff, right? To like do those calls. And I was like, I want to, allow that for the people. And people are always saying like, I got my job in this industry from people of color publishing. And so it's just like, so like, I was working on a client's book, and the person who was the editor she was like, I had to take a moment, I'm a huge fan. Like I wouldn't be in this industry because of you. And it was so emotional. I was just like, and I had to be like, okay, can we get back to the meeting now? But I was just so overcome with emotion. I'm like, I gotta start crying in front of the client. But it happens all the time. And it's really beautiful. It's something that I'm grateful for my friends for reminding me, because it's something I think, it's not that I brush it off, but I think it's just in the day-to-day of things, it's something that I forget. And so it's really nice to have that kind of impact, and to know that like people were finding their footing and like getting in the door of an industry that was really hard for me to get in the door of. And like, not even because in my case, it wasn't, I always tell people this, I'm like, it wasn't because I had socioeconomic barriers. My family was pretty middle class, and I went to, but it was like, I was from Texas and I went to school in Boston. So there were still some publishing there, but it was just so hard. And I always say like, it was hard for me, coming from a family who, when things got really hard, when I was living in New York and my family could support me, imagine what it's like from someone who, just hasn't have any of that, Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, it's like the barriers it's so much sometimes to get into publishing. I'm thankful now. It's easier. My assistant, she works remotely. I work remotely. My assistant works remotely. And I love that. That was a big part of when I was hiring for an assistant, was making sure that it was someone who could work anywhere, Mm. So I do love that that's changing. It's sad that it took a, global pandemic for that to happen, but I love that that's changing, but there's still, it's just like, I think we have to continue to remove those barriers and asking how we can support people who aren't like the people who come from your like Columbia publishing courses and things like that.
And what a wonderful way to give back. Right. Between like you giving your time, and then it feels like you're continuing that kind of trajectory by editing things like the YA paranormal romance anthology, Eternally Yours, which features a lot of diverse voices in it.
Yeah. It's really cool. So my But my first anthology was The Phoenix First Must Burn.
Oh.
And it came out a few years ago, and it's focusing on like, Black women and non-binary writers, and it's science fiction and fantasy. So I kind of pitched it as like, Beyonce's Lemonade meets Octavia Butler. It's like a narrative story. The book is organized chronologically in a fun way that doesn't make sense until you start reading. It starts from like the beginning of time to like the future. It wasn't like I was like, your story needs to happen at this time, your story here. So yeah, so that was great. So I feel like for me, this one was one of those things where it was like, it was so important for me, as a, Black queer woman to be able to be able to put together all these people. Like, I think when I first put together, and I wrote to my agent, and I was like, I want to do this thing. It was just like growing up, I was like, there were so many stories about Black people, but they were often dealt with like centered trauma, And I was like, I wanted something that was just fun, that like you can just go to and pick up, and you're like, wow, that is such a fun story, and it's all these things. And I like things that, like, for me, I feel like I'm always seeking out. I'm always like, who are the like other people? Who are people who have my identity, who are writing this thing, doing this thing? So I got to know some of these authors were emerging, were already pretty big when I reached out to them, but some of them were not. And it's funny because now they're like much, bigger authors. And I'm like, I'm so honored to have you in here. Like, so like, and it's great because it's like, I like that it's like a sampling. So you can pick this up, you can read if you're kind of like, and I feel like I had a lot of, Black bookstagrammers and bloggers who were like, oh my God, this is so cool. I got to pick it up, and I went in for my favorite. And then I found all these new people, right? After I'd done Phoenix, it had gotten really well received. And honestly, I was just kind of like, I don't know what to do. Like, I feel like my publisher was like, do you have an idea for another anthology? And then, but then I kind of was like, okay, like what would I follow it up with? So I kind of was like, maybe we should do like a Phoenix, like volume 2, with like the next generation of Black writers. But like so many of them, like, I think the difference with Phoenix is that it was kind of, when I put it together, it was kind of equally, some of the people like Elizabeth Acevedo and like Danielle Clayton and, and Rebecca Roanhurst were already like debuting, Justine Ireland were already debuting, getting a lot of attention. But then, so then I got to like, bring in a lot of new voices. And I feel like when I was putting together the pitch for the next volume, it was like, so many people hadn't even, like, their books had just sold, or like not even sold. So it just didn't feel like, because it basically was like, the thing about publishing a book is you do have to kind of think of the business side of things. Readers want to see names they recognize, and that's what hooks them into buying the volume and discovering all these new voices. And if there are no names they recognize, it's kind of like, how do we do this, And so it didn't feel like the right time for that. And so they just kind of were like, well, what's next? And I have always loved paranormal romance. You can't see it in these bookshelves, and I have some shelves in my bedroom, and there are just walls and walls. It's just like, I love paranormal romance. I love like urban fantasy. I love things, all that kind of stuff, my parents are big science fiction and fantasy readers, watchers, and I kind of grew up on like, Underworld and Blade and like all those kind of things, big franchises, like, also in Star Trek and Star Wars. And I love the mix of like when the supernatural like kind of collides with like our real life or even the fantastical. And so for me, I was like, I loved working on a Phoenix First Must Burn so much. And in passion, like really, it was like a passion project, And so I was kind of like, well, if I'm going to do this again, like, I feel like it should be something I'm equally passionate about. I put together a proposal, which was basically like, a document being like, hey, like, here's like the overview, like why this story, why now, why am I the person to do it, like, who I would get together in this thing. And I just shot for the stars. I think after Phoenix, I kind of was like, you know what, like people trust me, and like I got this great list of people, for this anthology, so I'm gonna try to do it again. And so I was just like, I went through paranormal romance, I went through all these people, and I remember being like, paranormal romance was like pretty much dead in like YA. I feel like there were all those paranormal hits of like the early 2000s, and like they like kind of like not overtook the market in a bad way, but they were like, the market was full of them. So, but I had always had I was always like, it's gonna come back. And I feel like people always ask like industry professionals, like, what about the trends in the industry? And for me, I was like, I just feel like paranormal romance is coming back. It had been done. It was huge in the early 2000s, but it was, so as a result, it was kind of hard to like get, acquire new stories in that space because those books were still selling, And so a lot of people would call paranormal romance, especially in the young adult space, dead. A lot of times industry professionals were asked like, what are the trends? What's going to, be big? And I usually refrain from commenting on those sorts of things because of the fact that like, it's just like, you just never know, And I also think I've been there as a writer, and I when I was starting out as a writer, I used to pay attention to that kind of stuff. People would say, what are the trends? And I would be, oh, this book I'm working on won't have any success, you know? And so I don't like telling writers, because often writers who ask that when I'm at conferences and stuff, and I'm always like, no, just write your story, lead with passion, you know, and do the best you can. But I had just been seeing it. I had this gut feeling that paranormal romance was going to come back. And I had started to see some acquisitions that were like in that space. And so I was just like, you know what? I think this is the right time for this. I'll talk about my novel later, but my novel also has some paranormal elements as well. And so I was just like, I just feel it. And then, so basically, put together a proposal. My publisher was like, yeah, great, we'd love to see it, and made an offer. You know, one of the things I learned from putting together a Phoenix First Must Burn was that there were a lot of people who had never written, like Elizabeth Acevedo. You know, I had just read her work. I knew Liz, and I was just like, I just felt in my gut that she could write a really cool, like, sci-fi or fantasy story. She never had, though, you know? But I just felt like she could do it. And then when I asked her, she was like, actually, I've been thinking of doing something like, so it was kind of perfect timing, right? And Rebecca Roanhurst, I feel like she ended up doing like a middle grade series. At the time, she had only done her adult, but I was like, oh, would you consider writing something for the teen audience? So I feel like there were a lot of people I reached out who I was like, I'm a big fan of your work, but I want you to do something a little different. And it was so fun getting to work with them in that way. So for this, I put together all these people, you know, like Casey McQuiston, who at the time had not written YA, when like, you know, books take a couple years to come out. So at the time I pitched this book, I hadn't written YA, you know? And there were just, and so it was like Sarah Gailey, who I love their adult work, but also hadn't written YA. So I was like a lot of people. And there were people like Melissa De La Cruz, who I loved her Blue Blood series growing up. It was, you're right. It was a big inspiration for me. And I was just like, man, that would just be like goals to get like one of my favorite authors growing up in my own anthology. And then she said yes. So then honestly, I got really stressed out. And there were people like Alexis Henderson, who wrote, Year of the Witching, which I love. So it's amazing adult fantasy. But she had this tweet where she was like, I want paranormal romance to come back. I don't want it to be like, you know, cutesy falling angels. She was like, I want like 1,000 eyeballs, like falling angels, like this like gothic dark. And after she tweeted that, I said, you want to write that for my anthology? And so like that's kind of how it happened. Like bit by bit, I just started like Kat Cho, who I was like, oh, I know she loves like, you know, paranormal romance. Kendari Blake, she's already a fancy writer. She did Anna Dress in Blood. And I was like, you know, so Kendari's like, you know, huge for Three Dark Crowns. She also did Anna Dress in Blood, which is, you know, and it was this amazing YA horror series. And I was like, I want you to write something that's like paranormal, but a little off and a little spooky. And like, I mean, her story opens up the anthology, and it's great. It's like, you know, I don't want to see that, but I feel like if you read it, you're like, oh man, like this is like, and you know Kendari's work, you're like, this is 100% her. And there's like Anna Marie McLemore, who they're so talented, who wrote me, who was like, can I write you a story in verse? I was like, take that. I don't even know what a paranormal romance story in verse looks like, but I was like, I know Anna Marie could do it, you know? And there was like Sonia Menon, who is just like so great in the romance space. And I didn't know that Sonia was a huge paranormal romance fan, but I knew, she writes a great romance. So I was like, you know, writing paranormal romance. And she was like, I love paranormal romance. And I was like, look at that. From there, it was like, Julian Winters, Akshaya Rahman, a close friend of mine. She hadn't debuted yet, but I love like the you know, getting to push people. I was like, Akshaya, you can do this. And it's funny because like her story is so well mentioned all the time in reviews. They're always like, oh my God, I love this. So now I'm trying to get her to write a novel based on it, but we'll see. And then like Chloe Gong, you know, I feel like obviously people know These Violent Delights. And you know, Chloe also, I think a lot of people talk about like she really grew up. She's a YA writer who really grew up like in the heyday of YA. And I was like, listen, if you grew up during that time, you know, you read some paranormal romance, you know, and you loved YA, and if you're a big YA fan. So I just was like, I had an inkling, and then it was just like perfect, you know. So I feel like we went from there. And yeah, I feel like it was really great. So we had a couple people drop out, which happens all the time, especially with anthologies, and also the pandemic had happened. You know, a lot of stuff was going on, but it was great because. So Kaylin Bayron and Chloe Gong, I actually hadn't asked originally, in large part because their books hadn't debuted. So, I mean, I just didn't, like, I knew them online as writers, you know, but I didn't really know them. I was actually an editor. I left at a children's book editorial in the end of 2019, which is also when I sold this book. Kaylin, I actually had gotten her book on submission. So I had some, you know, I knew I was familiar with their work, but it hadn't published yet. It didn't publish until 2020. So when that happened, my publisher was kind of like, well, we can leave it as is, or we can add some more people because we have room time in the schedule. And I was like, I'd like to add 2 people who like, I really love what they're doing, their work now. And I think they have what it takes to pull off the, you know, stories in here. And so I asked Kaylin Bayron, I asked Chloe Gong, and was perfect because they were like, hell yeah. And then they wrote just 2 amazing paranormal stories, you know? And so I feel like it was like, meant to be in that way. So yeah, I think it's like, I have a lot of fun putting these together. I had a lot of fun. I was a book blogger. I had a popular book blog before I was an editor. And so I love, like, I've always approached everything as a kind of like a fangirl. And so I loved, that was a big part of it. It's like, working in the industry now, I have my own clients, and of course I'm huge fans of their work, but as an editor, I just don't get to like engage as much. Like I get to engage with people as a reader, but I don't really get to like work with people in that way who are just new. Like, it's very rare that I'm like, I don't sign someone to work on like one project and then be like, hey, bye, So it's like, that's been the greatest thing about working on these anthologies, is just getting to work with people who I'm huge fans of and get them to do something a little different and push them in a different direction. Melissa Cruz gave me the best gift ever by writing a story set in the Bluebirds world. And then, and like around the same time, I found this out because, so I worked at Disney Publishing, and when I worked there, I found out that she was going to be like restarting Blue Bloods. And then obviously I couldn't really say that, but then so when I did this, I was like, when I reached out to Melissa, I was like, she knew I knew. And then yeah, it just became perfect because she was like, I'm going to write something in the Blue Bloods world, and like around the same time her new, and it was just like, oh my God, it was just perfect. As like a fan of that series, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever.
Sounds like it was pretty perfect. And I am so glad you brought back Paranormal. Thank you. I'm so excited that we're kind of seeing more of that wave again, because I did miss Paranormal, to be honest.
Yeah, and I just wanted to be, more. I think the thing, I talk about this in my introduction for the anthology, but one of the things that kind of always bummed me out when people would say Paranormal is dead is like, we didn't really see like a lot of queer characters, a lot of like people of color. We didn't see like the like diversification I feel like we're seeing now in the industry. It's like Paranormal kind of just like stopped, it was like, it never really got that. And so for me, I was just like, I was like, what is a book I could go back in time and hand to my younger self? I think that's the thing when I'm writing, it's like, I write for myself first and foremost. Phoenix First Must Burn, it was like, all right, well, I wanted my younger self who loves science fiction and fantasy to be able to read that centering, like these books centering Black characters, being Black girls who were just like kicking butt and doing all these cool things that I never got to see that happen in books when I was growing up. And then so when I switched with Eternally Yours, it was like, okay, I was obsessed with vampires growing up. And it's like, how can I give that to myself? What would that book look like? And I'm like, well, it would have like some of today's best-selling authors. It would have, all these different authors who are just doing great things. I don't know. I love that. I feel like it's kind of like they just took a break from their day jobs and did a one-off for me. And it makes it so much fun. I don't know. And I think they had a really good time doing it too. And it's a wonderful group. And so that's kind of was a big part of it. It's like, it's both my anthologies. They're so queer. They're so diverse. And I love that. I think that's, it's amazing to get to put that into the world. And I think my younger self would just be like, so happy.
That's a lovely thought to go into a book thinking of like, okay, would my younger self love this? To be able to craft a book around that idea. And you mentioned like it. So did the initial idea start in 2019? Like how long did the book take?
So in general, I feel like books, it varies, sometimes a book a year, but I usually books don't publish like a year to 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years after. Romance authors, they have a whole different timeline. I don't know how they write so fast and like so well. I'm not complaining. I love it. I love my, like, the book comes out and they're like, oh, and the next book will be out in 6 months. And I'm like, thank you so much. And YA tends to be about 2 years. So we sold it in 2019. I think it was supposed to come out at the end of last year, I believe. But then the pandemic happened. It's like, I don't know. It just felt like a lot of people were going through a lot of stuff. I was having stuff I was going through. And it just didn't feel right. I talked to my publisher about rushing people to produce the short story when people were like, losing job, all these things were happening. And I was just like, this isn't the right time, And so I feel like, pushing it back and having it come out this year was amazing because I feel like we had more time. The stories are stronger for it, And also, again, I had time to add Chloe Gong and Caitlin Bayron, who I couldn't see this anthology without. So yeah, I'm really, really glad they took the time. But the reason why is because, so with like a novel, you write your novel, you turn it in, you and your editor do some rounds of edits, goes to copy editing. And it's really you controlling that. And then because of all the printing issues and all the special things we're having, sometimes books, like it might be like, you might be done with the book and it might be truly a whole year later that the book comes out. But for like an anthology, especially because I'm wrangling like, it's 15 other people, So I had my own story in this anthology. I wrote a story in this anthology. I did not in Eternally Yours. A large part of that was because I'm not naturally a short story writer. And I was going to write a story in it, but I was also working on my novel at the same time. And I just was like, this just isn't going to work. I was like, I'm like, my brain is not, I'm not like, I can't like switch things off in that way in terms of writing. So I was working on this like epic fantasy gothic-y like book. And then it's like, and then it was just like the two things were just not like, my brain was like, I can't. You have 15 people come in with a story and you're like, oh, that has great bones, but wow, it needs like we need to do some extra rounds to get it to where it needs to go. Or some stories you're like, hey, that's really in great shape. We actually only need to do a line edit. That's the selling point, right? There's such well-known authors on their own. As a result, though, they have their own deadline. So if something gets pushed back in their own book, something in their own life, it's like, so then we have to make more time. Yeah, I mean, that's just like what going into putting together an anthology, but that's the whole thing. It just like, it like you kind of have to work on each thing, and then you have to get all the stories to a certain level. And then, yeah, so it was like, they would turn the stories in. I would give them some notes, and then, they would turn in a revision. And then me and the editor who acquired the book at Penguin Teen, Dana, she would go and give a round, and then we read it, and then maybe we do some like line, but then, and then it'd be done, and then we do copy edits, which they would get the copy edits. And yeah, so it was like basically a mini book. It was like little mini rounds, like a developmental round, line edits, and this, and then more if needed. I'm a former editor, so I always say, like, if it's going to have my name on it, I'm going to know that your story is great. I always say thank you to my contributors for trusting me, because there were times where I was like, I remember my friend Akshaya, like, she texted me at one point being like, is my story like just like secretly bad and you're just being nice to me because we're friends? And I was like, your story is actually really, really good. Know that you can make it better. And at one point, I kind of just talked to her about it, and she was like, I'm going to rewrite the whole story. I was like, you don't have to do that. She was like, no, I know what you're trying to tell me. And you know what? No regrets, because I think, when you know someone, they can do a better job. And then what she turned in, I was like, that's it, I think that's the trust, though, of like an editor relationship. It's like, and I knew that from having been a book editor, it's like, that's that kind of trust you have between you and the author is, it's like gentle call outs of like, yeah, this is good, but it's not your best. And like, I would like your best,
And that's, like you said, that relationship between the author and the editor. And that's kind of something I was curious about, was like what that editing process looked like. So you said it kind of just like went a piece by piece.
Yeah, it's like kind of like, rounds of development as it needs. And it kind of starts with me saying stuff like, it's usually big questions like, you said that your character is this very determined, blah, blah, blah person. Okay, so then why did she go and do this? And so it starts with that kind of stuff where it's just like poking holes in things of like, this is the world you set up. This doesn't make sense. And then it gets to like smaller details, like, so she was wearing a blue sweatshirt. Why is the sweatshirt white? And so it starts from these bigger level things of like these big picture things of like, okay, I think we need some characterization work, or okay, this. And it's really like kind of like, I'm always trying to help you tell your story better. That's why I feel my role as an editor. Not telling the story I want to tell. It's like, here's the story you presented me, and if people are using references, I always, so why Cat Show had some Twilight head nods, and I thought they were Twilight head nods, or, former Twihard. But I always like to make sure if people are dropping references, I want to make sure you're consciously bringing something into your own work and not subconsciously. So I was like, like, hey, is this on purpose? Or and then she confirmed it. And I was like, okay, let's make these changes to really make that clear and lean into it. And because I think that's just important. It's like, I think so often as writers, we consume a lot of media. It's just people, right? And so it's so easy for me to slip unconsciously into your work and not be aware of it. So I like to make sure, okay, like, let's be conscious about what we're putting in. We're going to have it in there. Look, let's lean all the way in and like make it very clear this is a Twilight reference, because people are going to love that. I think they're going to love that. It's a mix. It's whatever the story needs, but it's getting it to be to the point where you as a reader aren't reading this being like, okay, so they're reincarnated lovers. And in your mind, you might be like, wow, I need to suspend some disbelief, but you're in a paranormal romance world, so you already know that, right? So that's disbelief. You can suspend that disbelief. That's like, I always say, like, it's like a promise to your reader. Like, that is what the genre demands. That's the definition of the genre. So you already know that. But if like the plot doesn't make sense, then that's going to throw you off. So I want you to be like, you might be asked to be like, oh, this is ridiculous, but you're having fun in that way. And that's fine. What I don't want is for you to be like, this is really confusing.
Chloe's was one of my faves because I did immediately read that when I saw like, oh, that is a Twilight reference. Title alone, I got me.
And it was so fun because it is. It's like, I was loving with Chloe. So I had them all send me pictures of their stories before they actually wrote them. And I knew things would change, but it just helped me to make sure we had, so the anthology is organized kind of like the creatures are grouped together. And it was funny because one of the copy editors was like, hey, you have like 2 mermaid and 2 vampire and 2 this stories back to back. And I was like, on purpose. But I appreciated them asking. And I was like, I wanted people to see like the the variety in paranormal romance that we always don't get to see. It's like there's 2 angel stories back to back. They could not be vastly different. Like you have Julian Winters, which is like so cutesy, like rom-com-y, kind of like, cutesy love story. I mean, there's depth to it, of course. But as I always say, people are always like, oh, rom-com, so fluffy. I'm like, yeah, and fluff can have depth. But in there's fluff. Where else then there's Alexis Henderson's, which if you know her work, it's a little heavier. And my one requirement to everyone was like, take your stories wherever you want to go. Like it has to be a romance story. So it has to end with happily ever after or happy for now. And I read a lot of romance, and that's my, whenever people are like, I don't understand, like, you can like end up apart and it'd be a romance novel. I'm like, no, it can't. Like, it's just another novel. It's not a romance novel though, So that was the one thing I was like, I'm not having Romance Landia come find me for calling this a romance novel if there's not happy endings. I was like, y'all are going to end these stories on a happy note. But I was like, whatever else you want to do. So, it's vastly different. And that's the thing, like Chloe, and then I love how we got your typical characters. And when Cat Show gave me vampires, I was like, thank you. And so did Melissa, I was like, this is what I was like, I just want some vampire stories. So we got your typicals, but then you have like Shia, who gives you like, she was like, I want to tell something from my culture. I was like, I love that, please. It's like, and then, reincarnated lovers. And I loved how Chloe's was, when I got the pitch, I cracked up and I was like, this is going to be great, because it's just like, it's like paranormal romance before like the modern day, like, type A girl who's got shit to do. Like Chloe was like, she was talking to me about it. She was like, okay, let's just imagine like you're in high school. You're doing all these things. You're super type. This is how you're raised. You're truly type A. You're like, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do all these things. And then some guys coming in, like, what would it actually be like? That's a popular trope in paranormal romance, the idea of reincarnation. Like, what would it actually be like if this guy is like, we've been lovers for centuries? You'd be like, dude, I don't have time for this. And so I love how she just took that hilarious thing where I was like, all right, I can see that. She, because she kind of was like, the bone I've always had to pick is like, but would this girl really have time for all this stuff? And I was like, I love that. You're going to go in and be like, all right, a head nod to like paranormal romance of old, quote unquote, the early 2000s, but also like, I don't have time to be dealing with you. So it's like funny how he's like pursuing her, right? And she's just like, I have SATs. Like, and I love that. I found that it just felt so teen, in this really fun way. So yeah, people brought their A game, it was great.
Well, and that's what I loved about the stories. Like you said, they were all so vastly different. Like there were diverse characters, diverse genders, diverse types of paranormal creatures. So like when you were editing it to make it cohesive, it seemed like a daunting task with different type of stories, like you were saying, and styles and everything like that. So how did you edit it?
Yeah, so I think my experience from A Phoenix First Must Burn taught me a lot, which is that, and I did the similar thing with Phoenix, but I think with Eternally Yours, I knew it wouldn't go as to plan. So with Phoenix, I was like, I want you to send me, a paragraph if I want, and we're going to do this. But and then like everything kind of like people send me paragraphs and halfway like pitches of their story, paragraph pitches. A few months later, they were like, so here's a story, but this is not what I pitched. So with Eternally Yours, I went in there knowing that, because that's how writers work, people with the best intentions. They weren't doing it maliciously. They had the best of intentions of being like, this is the story. But as they got to writing it, they were like, this isn't the story that I'm called to write, And I'm someone who very much so believes that like writing is like, in some way it takes the pressure. I feel like I always love that Elizabeth Gilbert TED Talk where she talks about like geniuses and the idea of like, it's all on the individual. We're in so many places. There've been the muses, there've been all these different things that people called on to write, And I feel like I very much so believe that. I feel like to me, I don't mean writing is ritualistic in the way that like I have to do the same thing every time or like I can't write. Because I think if you have too many constrictions on your writing, it can be to a point where you just start not writing when you need to write because you're like, well, I have to do this first, I have to do this first. But I do believe that like my ability to write doesn't just come from me, and I think that takes some of the pressure off. It's like, I need to show up at my desk. The creative spirit is going to like, and so I feel like I totally get that. So when people come in with something totally different, I'm like, that's fine. I expected that to happen. So I allowed time in the schedule for that to happen, and I asked for everyone to send me a paragraph pitch of their story first. So that helped a lot. So I kind of already from the beginning was thinking about, all right, I know the authors and I know their work. So I was pretty sure, for example, that like Hadid and Anna Marie's like mermaidy story. I was like, I think these like are going to be different enough. So I was like, I knowing their work, there's no way I could see the two of them writing the same thing. But I was like, let me keep an extra eye to make sure, and they came in, they were vastly different. So it didn't matter. Right. So, but like, it was that stuff like that. Right. Because I basically only gave them the requirement of like, it's for teen audience. And it ends in like, happily ever after, happy for now. Then Casey's like, yeah, I'm going to write like Bloody Mary. And I was like in my mind, I was like, so when I said, but but I think there's like the trust where I was like, you know what? read their work, you know, and this, I'm going to trust it. Like, when we're all adults here, yeah, I'm going to, and like, you know, same, like, you know, when Kendari pitched me their story, I was like, I mean, you have the makings of it, but also you kill a lot of people in your books. So I'm just, you know, in my head, I was like, okay, but then you kill a lot of people. But I had to trust them. I had to trust. I was like, all right, I just kind of withheld comments until the first draft. So, and with the pitches, the only comments I gave for the pitches was stuff like, hey, you know, I just want to make sure, like, because sometimes it would be like, this sounds like a lot. Are you sure this is a short story, like, and not a novel? So like, it would be kind of that, so like, let's make sure this is that kind of structural stuff. Or anyways, this stuff, like, if I had worries that I would be like, just don't forget it needs to end on a happy ending. Put the two characters together, like happy ending, not with them apart, like happy ending in the romance sense, you know? So I would just be like, just don't forget, don't kill anybody. Right now, of course, she did actually, but it works out. Then when I got the stories, that's when I kind of was able to dig in. And one of the things I learned from my experience with A Phoenix First Must Burn is that I needed to see all the stories together. So we got the stories in, but I had to tell Dana, some were kind of running late. And I was like, we're going to have to push this back because I have to read them all at the same time. Because what I didn't want to happen was me start, you know, really delving in and working. And then a story come in and I was like, in some ways, those are tonally too similar, or this one's like so different tonally than the others. And then I'd be like, I don't really know what to do here, you know? And I love that people play with formats and stuff. Like Sarah Gailey, did this really cool thing where it's an interview transcript. That was like, not a challenge in like a bad way, but it was more like, I was like, hey, we got to fill the romance in interview transcripts, you know? And so it was like, it was fun. I love that stuff. And like I said, Anne-Marie McLemore delivered like a story in verse. Have I ever edited? Actually, I have edited verse. I know I said that. That's not true. But the point being is like, I was an English political science major. I studied a lot of poetry. I love poetry, but I really had to pull on that. I was like, okay, like, all right. I was like, okay, let's look at them. You know, there was times where I was like beating out meters. So I was like, there was like formatting things I was asking myself. And so it was a challenge for me personally, because every story was done differently, you know? Mm-hmm. And there's just different things. Like Melissa's within the Blue Bloods world. I wanted to make sure it was a part, but could say, like, if you were a Blue Bloods fan, you might, but you also it had to stand on its own, you know? So there were like, so it was things like that. And Casey's Bloody Mary thing ended up fine. It was great in the end. But that's a part of it. I had to trust people, you know, and they had to trust me that I wasn't going to receive their story and be like, when I said paranormal romance, I know I said do whatever, but I really only want like the typical characters, you know, because that would have been. And so I feel like it was like I got stuff I never expected, but the anthology ended up better for it, you know, because I was just like, wow, this is so freaking cool, you know. It is pegged in paranormal romance. And then I started asking myself, like Shai assure us, I was like, why haven't we had more paranormal romance with like demons from other cultures? Like, and that's why I keep telling her, I'm like, you need to write that as a book, because it's like, it's just so cool. It's like, I was like, there's so much, and I love the idea of packing so much into one story, you know, so many people packed in, like, there's a lot in these stories, like, you know, of like, I remember Kaylin's, when she sent me the pitch of hers and she actually wrote, she was like, is it going to be too dark? And I was like, but then I read it and I was like, and we, you know, there were some things I was like, all right, maybe this, maybe not, you know, but when we got to the end, I was like, I love this. Yeah. She's like, you know, killing people with it's like, but there's still romance, but that was something we had to massage to really make sure it's like, we're leaning into the romance part of it. So just, it wasn't like cutting stuff. It was just shifting the viewpoint and really making sure it's like centering the romantic at heart, right? It wasn't a romance. We didn't want romance subplots. We wanted it to be a romance story.
Well, and I appreciate that as whenever I see something that's like a paranormal romance, I want the romance. Yeah. You got to sell me on the romance.
It's like urban fantasy. I always say, you know, it's like, it's a 10-book series. We're at book 8. They finally get together and you're like, all right, you're like, okay, about time. But like, you know, but you're allowing for that. Right. Paranormal romance. I'm like, 50 pages in, where's the love interest, where's the setup, you know, there are beats and I think that's what I love about romance is like I think a lot of people are like, oh, people just put down romance and being like, it's so tropey, it's so this, it's the beats. I'm like, but that's why you go to read it. Yes. It's like the fact that you expect these beats and it's seeing what is the author going to do with this beat, you know? It's when they tell you there's only one bed, there better only be one bed, you know? It's like, you know, and like, I love the tropes. They're like, you know, when people are like, everyone who loves romance, you can, and I remember we were joking, they always know their trope. It's like, for me, it's enemies to lovers. I love A Marriage of Convenience, you know, and it never gets old. I've read probably like 100+ stories in those tropes, but they're all different, you know? And I think it's something about, it's a trust that romance writers give their reader, right? It's that I might take my characters to hell, you know, that breakup, if there's a breakup beat, it might hurt you, but you're gonna feel good in the end. Like for me, a big part of why like this anthology sustained me during the pandemic. You know, I'm a huge reader. And then suddenly I couldn't read. There was so much going on. I couldn't read books, and it was so weird to me. I was just like, I was struggling to read. And the things that got me back into reading were the things that I think, like a lot of people, because as a sales show, the things that were the nostalgia reads for me: romance, paranormal romance, urban fantasy. I went back to I reread all of my old favorites, you know? And then I would like get online and be like, okay, I need more. And I discovered so many new things in that way, because I feel like the community is so great at being like, all right, what's more? And I got really, really into reading that stuff. And I feel like I got really into the romance community and learned this really great appreciation for like, you know, just like how they treat their readers. It's like, you know, and in the day, I love there's not many books you can read these days, you know, aside from romance books, where you go into it and you just feel like you're going to have like a warm hug at the end. You know, so many books you read and I'll be like, oh man, this is great. And you get to that cliffhanger and you're like, I've thrown books across the room, either because the cliffhanger was so good and I'm screaming and now I'm waiting for book 2, or because I've been like, that didn't make any fucking sense. Why didn't they get together at the end? You know?
It's true.
And so I love that you can read romance novels and be like, man, this might be a roller coaster, but it's gonna be good in the end. So that's what I wanted with this anthology. You know, I wanted teens, especially. I feel like, you know, my sister, I'm the oldest of 5. I have a much younger than me sisters. And, you know, one of my sisters, I have 3 teen sisters, and one's 19, she's in college now. One's and then my 2 half sisters, one's 13 and one's 15, almost 16. You know, they struggled really hard during the pandemic. You know, I'm not saying that I didn't, but I think for them, it was like, you know, and I thought about this. I was a huge theater kid. I was involved in things, sports. And imagine if suddenly one day it was like, you're living your life and then it was gone. You know, my 19 sister got extremely depressed. And I will never forget one time, she was like a very straight A student, and her teacher called my dad and was like, hey, she hasn't been turning in her stuff. She's like risk of failing. Dad, who is a very even-tempered person, he yelled. He was like, my daughter is depressed. She doesn't have her friends. She doesn't have her sports. She's this. And he was just like, he's like, maybe you should give her a break and ask yourself, why is someone like her suddenly not turning in her work? He was like, if you want to talk to my daughter, you're gonna have to go through me. And I was like, oh my God, this poor teacher. But it was like, she lost everything, you know? I mean, she still had in touch with her friends, but it was a really, really hard year for her. And like, she didn't even know she wanted to go to college. And so it's great. She's totally fine now. And she's like, having the best time ever at college. But it's one of those things where I was like, if it doesn't happen to me, like, it would have rocked my world, you know? I mean, yeah, it was hard being suddenly away from all my friends. I was on tour with Phoenix at the time when it came up and the tour got canceled. So there's a lot of things that were very hard, but like my friends and I, we made it through, you know, we're adults. Like we did Zooms, and then we quarantined. We took like, you know, COVID tests. We like rented Airbnbs, and we started hanging out together. And we were like, hey, let's all get tested. Let's hang out. My sister and her friends, it was a lot harder for them to figure that out, you know? It's like, they're not independent. I have my own money, my own job, you know, stuff where it's like, I feel like this anthology, which is something that started something like fun that I want to do for myself, became something that I wanted to be like something fun, you know? I'm going to give people something fun that's just like, you're going to read this book and you're not going to have to worry about how things are going to end. You know, it's going to be a happy ending. And I think that's why we're seeing the romance boom. And I mean, it's happening everywhere, but it's also happening in young adult. And I think a large part of that is the fact that, like, you know, people just want that dose of like, yes, guaranteed serotonin, you know?
And I said it even in my very first episode that romance was kind of the genre of optimism. Like, because you know what to you know what to expect, and it's so happy, and it's happy in the end.
I'm a big fan of that. I feel like when I was an editor, I would get submissions all the time. It would be like, and I'd be like, you know, like really, and I'd be like, those are placed for those stories. I'm not trying to say don't write those stories. I always want to be very clear, especially with marginalized authors. Like, I never want you to feel like, because like when, you know, people, editors passing your work, you're like, wow, there's no place in the industry. And I would always pass, be like, there's a place. But me, I need my stories rooted. I need to be centered in joy, happiness. It doesn't have to end on a happy note, but I need there to be some sort of like, I need to know that they're going to be all right. Like, that's just the person I am, you know? If I'm going to edit something, I need to know that it ends out well.
Eternally Yours ends out well, everyone. No worries. Would you do another one? Would you do another anthology after the work you put into this one?
I don't know if it's not that it's something I've asked myself a lot. It's something I've had other people ask me. I just don't know. I think the thing is that every anthology I've done has been rooted in so much joy and passion that, like, I feel like it's almost felt like a calling, where I felt like internally I was like, I have to do this. I don't have that burning passion. Maybe when my novel is turned in, I think honestly a big part of why I can't think of anything else is because I have this book that's like looming over me, this deadline that's looming over me. So like maybe when that's turned in and it's through some more of the editorial process, I'll think of something else. But yeah, I mean, I feel like right now it's like there's nothing that's like pulling on me as much, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying no for now because there's just nothing I can think of, you know? And I think I've also learned, I'm not I can't do like multiple books in a year. You know, I'm not that kind of person because I was working on Eternally Yours and my novel at the same time. Eternally Yours, you know, it was so much work. And it's funny because at first I looked at the deadlines, they were laid out in front of me and I was like, yeah, cool, fine. And then, you know, luckily my editor for my novel was so understanding. She was just like, let's just push this back. I was like, yeah, because I can't. It was like, because I thought because I wasn't writing a story, I don't know why I was like, oh, it'll be easier this. It wasn't. It's not. Of course not. I'm a perfectionist to a fault and to a blessing, you know? I was like, well, people are trusting with their stories. I need to make sure it's good. I just couldn't, like, it's like my brain was like over here in like this space. And then like my novel was like, I need you to be in this space. And it just like wasn't happening. So I don't know. Maybe when the novel's done, when the series is almost done, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
So yeah, so maybe put a pin in that, and we'll another time.
I feel like when you see something, I think if I get an idea of something that's like, then I'll do it, you know. But it has to like pull at me.
There you go. That's fair enough. Yeah, it just has to really sit on you, right? Like sit on your heart hard.
I mean, it's a time commitment, and I feel like, and I think that's how all writers are. I feel like, you know, it's like, I mean, totally. I mean, obviously there are, you know, situations where like, but like this, I guess for me personally, it's like I'm not trying to be like, oh, money doesn't matter. That's still, I feel like that's silly to say that. It's like, yeah, you do get a check, you know, I get paid for this stuff, but it's not that the money doesn't matter. It's just at a certain point where you're like in the trenches and you're up against a deadline and you're like, oh my God, I might have to pull an all-nighter to get this thing done. In that moment, I'm not thinking of the money. I'm thinking about the personal time of my own that's getting taken up doing that thing. So it has to be something that in the end of the day, I love, you know, enough. It's like, it's going to sustain me through that.
So like, I'm going to focus on my book first, and then we'll think about an anthology later.
Yeah. That's what happens when you're under contract. It's kind of also like, yeah, I'm also contractually obligated for this one thing first.
That's true. So we've talked a lot about your incredible book, this incredible anthology of YA paranormal romance. So where can listeners find your book?
I mean, honestly, I would say anywhere books are sold. I would say, you know, order it from your favorite retailer, you know, whatever. I'm a big fan of supporting independent bookstores, but I also firmly believe in like getting the book. You know, I feel like people are always like, oh, like, it's like order the book from wherever you want to order the book from. And I will just be happy that you've ordered the book, you know? So I would say, you know, look it up online and it's pretty much available everywhere.
Awesome. And then how can they connect with you?
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram. And so I would just say, you know, just find me there. It's pretty easy. Just type in my name. You'll be like, Patrice Caldwell will pop up. So yeah, find me online. I feel like maybe I'm less active on Twitter these days. But I feel like Twitter is like my space for like talking about, I don't know, just like random things. I feel like Twitter for me has always been like just engaging with people and being like, oh yeah, like all this random stuff. And then I feel like, Instagram, you might see like more of my actual life and my writing process on Instagram because I often share that stuff in my stories.
Thanks so much to Patrice for joining the show. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. That way you're the first to hear new episodes when they drop. And if you get a chance, feel free to leave a review. It helps support the show and allows more opportunity to bring in all kinds of fantastic guests. Book recommendations for this episode: Eternally Yours, edited by Patrice Caldwell, and A Phoenix First Must Burn, edited by Patrice Caldwell. As always, stay safe, be well, and keep writing. Bye!